I am super excited to show you this. I've been working on this for the last couple of weekends, I'll be honest with you, but it's something I've been talking about for the last couple of years around understanding business content and then combining that with business policies. So this is all around autonomous agent for document classification. So bear with me. And the reason why this is really cool is because organizations have these business policies, whether it's data handling, whether it's HR, whether it's something else, and they all sit in a drawer. We don't read those, but combining technologies with those policies is something that we need to do. These policies are underpinning to the business, and it's always difficult for end employees to understand what they need to do when. They are using the content, they are creating new content. Classification, yes, there's ways of defining a classification policy or a classification label to that content, especially within Microsoft Purview, and we'll come to that in a little bit. But these policies and end users kind of content never really meet. So the reason for this autonomous agent is we can trigger on newly created or modified content, so where it lives. We're taking that burden away from the end user so they don't have to think about labeling or what label needs to apply to that policy. Or if the policy is changed, is it now like really critical to the business or now is it public data? So if we think about like end of financial year results, like before that's released, those results are internal only, they mustn't be leaked. And then they do become public knowledge then. So as and when that content changes, it's very hard for technology to understand that policy change as well about when it changes for when. So what we can do is when that content is triggered, we can perform a series of actions through Power Automate. So that's looking at the file creation. It's converting that file into something that's easily passable or parsable within the technology. We're using something called AI Builder, and I'll show you this in a demo in a second, to summarize in detail what that content is. Now remember, if this content or document is hundreds of pages long, it's going to be very difficult for a Gen AI model to reason over that entire document, just because of the context window, depending on the model you're using under the covers. Now, you've probably seen the announcements, like this is subject to change, as in the OpenAI O1 models are now coming. They have larger context windows, which is pretty cool. But once we've passed that document and we have a summary of that, we're able to pass additional variables to the autonomous agent. So the autonomous agent that you can see over on the right-hand side here has a number of different things to do. So it is able to see the information that's passed to it and then understand within its general instructions about what it should do with that type of data. Now, in the instructions, we're saying you always need to go to your knowledge source because in there is a business document that is our data handling or our classification scheme. So every time you see some new content, look at the knowledge source because things might have changed, right? And you can make a decision there about what the classification should be from that detailed summarization of the content. Now, based on that result, we can then trigger on the actions of the agent. So the actions is defining what it needs to go away and do next. So it knows the classification label. And we're able to call out to a series of different actions or functions. In this case, we're using some HTTP requests in order to update the original document over in SharePoint. Now, this looks really complicated, but it's actually really easy. I'll show you this in a demo in a second. But what we can do using the power of Microsoft Purview as well is we can monitor for that metadata change and then automatically apply a classification label or protection to that content as well. So just a bit of a caveat here. The reason why I'm applying metadata and not automatically just applying the sensitivity label is just to provide some flexibility because there's a lot of power within Purview, like the extended sensitive information types and being able to look at models of data and pattern matching, which you might want to use in combination with this as well. So again, this is flexible. It's just an approach that you could take for this. So enough with the preamble. Let's go in and actually show you how this is set up. So this is my classification agent. This is an autonomous agent, so it's headless. I know on the right-hand side, like we can have a chat with it while we're testing it to ensure that the general instructions do work. But what this is going to do is monitor for those changes in content. So just to kind of briefly show how this is set up, we've got a description in which the agent is going to look at. So this is its purpose, like what are you here to do at a very, very high level. And it's taken me a little bit of time to really tighten down the general instructions. So if you watched my video last time, I showed a classification agent that end users could talk to and say, well, of this content I'm working on, what should be the classification of it? But those instructions were great for human interaction, not so great for autonomous agents. So what we can do here is we can ensure that the custom instructions or the general instructions are very, very defined. So here you can say at the very top, I am saying, here's the classification scheme you need to look at. And it is always up to date. It's a living document, so it's being updated daily. I'm giving it the idea of the classification labels that are situated within that knowledge base. I'm then defining the criteria, so the sensitivity level, so giving it some instructions or some questions it should ask itself while it's reasoning over the classification scheme. And then you'll start to see these kind of weird little lines here. This is me defining the instructions, exactly how it's going to pass these variables across to the action a little bit later. So this is a little bit of tweaking. I didn't get this right first time at all. It took a few hours to really, really tighten this down. And then I'm giving it the outputs that I'm expecting, the metadata, and the things I do not want it to do. So again, this is super important when you don't want to just quote internal policies or just go off on a rant. You don't want it to be hypothetical, so it needs to reason over the knowledge source, definitely. And at the very end, then we're giving it some examples. So this is what I'm expecting you to go away and do. Give me the label. Here's an example. And then just because while I'm testing this, I want it to give me a brief explanation about what this is. So that explanation could be published as a metadata column within SharePoint as well. So that could be really good because you can apply additional data then that an AI or a human being can actually reason over what that document contains. Some other important things to note here, I've got orchestration turned on. This is now generally available. So we need that for the Gen AI to actually work. We've disabled user's own knowledge, so we don't want to make stuff up from its underlying model. We've got the classification scheme as the knowledge source here as well. And just to show you what that looks like, this is the data handling policy. So in here, I'm defining, again, in Markdown, so in a structured way, what all of the labels are available in my organization, the description of use. I'm making sure I've got a series of different examples within here as well, and the guidelines in which it should be handling that. So this is a business policy, like humans can pick this up and read it as well, but the autonomous agent is also able to do a better job at understanding what content relates to what classification. Next, we got some actions, which we'll come back to in a bit, and we've got our triggers. Now, I did start playing around with different topics. Topics allows you to understand a different flow of conversations and then pick up different variables from there. I tried many, many hours with this. It did work, but I found a much better way in order to provide the output from this agent. So I did away with topics, but what I did do is created this action within here, this trigger from here, and this is what it looks like. So when a file is created, for example, and I'm monitoring a SharePoint library, I'm just pulling out some variables from that output, just because I want to pull in those variables in other different ways in the future. So you could technically do away with those if you're creating this yourself at home. We're going to go away and get the actual content of the file within SharePoint. And then what there's a better way of doing this rather than these converting files, is there's a set of graph APIs where you can take the original file content and actually use the APIs to do this conversion. Just because it's a lot easier to do here, I'm actually calling out into OneDrive and I'm creating a new file and then converting that. So this is a preview feature at the moment, just to make life a lot easier as part of this, this proof of concept. And then to do a cleanup here, I'm deleting the file, of course. Next, we're going to use AI Builder in order to recognize the text in the PDF document. So we're reading the body of it. And then we're passing that full text then over to an AI summarization in order to give me a detailed summary of this, which is pretty neat. And then, of course, I'm passing this back to the agent itself. So this is the trigger. This works independently to the agent. So it's on a polling basis. At the moment, it's polling every day. You could have this for a couple of hours or once a week, maybe. And then at the very end, we're actually collecting all of the important information that we need in order to send this to the agent itself. So here you can see I'm calling the classification agent, which is pretty cool. So next, when that trigger happens and it passes the information to the agent, then it's going to reason over our general instructions, look at the knowledge source, which is going to be our document classification, which is pretty cool. And then with the defined label, it's going to automatically go away and hit our trigger. Now you'll see under these actions, if we click on here, you'll be able to see another set of instructions. And think of this as this agent has got a brain, that's its general instructions, but it's got arms and legs as well. So we have to tell it what the arms and legs can actually do. So we have just over 1,000 characters that we can write here into our agent. I'm not going to pull all of this out for you, but this is telling the agent what this action can fully do. So I'm telling it contains, this library contains a column called AI sensitivity. We're telling it what methods it should use. So we're actually putting some variables in here and some examples, some header information, and all of the information it needs in order to fill in those inputs into SharePoint. So what that looks like, these inputs, I've defined this in here for the site address. These are required fields, but some of these are dynamically filled in with the best option from the agent. So that's why the general instructions and the action instructions need to be as precise and correct as possible. So you'll go through a series of testing to ensure that this is passing the right information. You might be wondering as well why I'm using HTTP request to SharePoint. That's purely because the action that can call and change properties for SharePoint requires an ID. Now, this ID is unique to the file in SharePoint, but because the actions or the flows are separate between the triggers and the actions, it wasn't passing that information. So it's just easier for me in order to use this type of request. You'll also notice here, I'm not asking the user to go away and do anything. So it's going to be autonomous. And then what this looks like is if we head over to our SharePoint, this is where we can see the SharePoint library that we're monitoring. And I've set up a column here or metadata column here called AI sensitivity. So it's automatically applying the label that needs to be defined here. So as I said before, there are APIs in order to go in, find the content, and then automatically apply a sensitivity label through the Graph APIs. This is just a nicer way in order to monitor during this POC that when I apply the sensitivity, Purview then can pick up this metadata and apply a sensitivity label. Another thing to note is just adding a column in here doesn't automatically mean that this column is going to be indexed by SharePoint. So what you need to do is head over to the SharePoint Admin Center, click on More Features, under Search, then Manage Search Schema. And this is where you need to define that managed metadata column. So once the reindexing has happened for that site, you'll see this. So you won't see this yet. What you need to do is actually add a new property, a managed property within here called AI sensitivity. It'll pop up in here. Once the site has been indexed, then you'll be able to see the mapped crawled properties for this. If you don't do this, then Purview will never be able to see the metadata and will never apply the sensitivity label either. Okay, let's have a go. I'm going to move this fictitious internal finance agreement. I'm going to move this into this folder. We'll just pretend that we've created it here. So I could create a new document within here if I wanted to, if I was moving files around. You're able to see now this internal finance agreement, and it's automatically applied the classification of confidential. Now, if we head over back to actions and activity, we can monitor what the agent is actually seeing. So we'll jump into this in a little bit. Just to show you that, let's go back to the flow for a second. I've just tested the flow just to ensure that trigger is a little bit quicker. But this is where you can see where we're actually pulling out the content. So when you run your tests, you're able to see the inputs and outputs of the actual actions taking place. So if we scroll down here, we're able to see that it was a finance agreement, and we're pulling out the summary as well. So down here, you can see it was successful, and then we've got the summary of the finance agreement, of which it's then passing to our agent. So if we head back to the activity tab, we can now click on that autonomous trigger. If we scroll right at the top, we can see when a file is created or modified with the properties only. We can see the trigger detail. We can see the detailed summary of the information. So the better the summary, or more verbose the summary is of that document, the better classification it's going to be. If we scroll right down the bottom, then we can see our call to the HTTP request for SharePoint and all of the detailed information that is going to transpose all of the variables we're sending to the agent, and then how it should publish that HTTP request. So things like the site address we can pull out. We can see the headers, for example. We can see the actual applying the column name, and we can see where the actual document lives. Sweet. So we got a session complete. Next, if we hit this button up here and go to transcript, this is where we can see the conversation of the agent. So we can see the summary that's being sent from the trigger. Here it is. And if we scroll down a little bit, at the very bottom of this, I'm also pulling in the additional fields, the actual variables that we need about where that detail lives. And this is how the autonomous agent is able to pick up that detail and then send that to the HTTP request. Here we can see the classification is confidential, and just to show you the explanation of what the agent sees, this is what is picked, that particular agent. If we head back to SharePoint, then I can see the AI class sensitivity now has been filled out, and then we're waiting for Purview to pick up that metadata. So let's show you what that looks like. If we head over to Purview, we can create some automatic labeling policies. And I've created just 2 here just as a proof of concept. But when we're looking for the confidential file, then we can automatically apply that based on the column name or document properties of it. So this is a automatic labeling policy for confidential. There's no admin units. We're looking at SharePoint. I have scoped that just to look at the one SharePoint library for a moment. And this is where we're defining what the conditions are. So the document property is, and then we've got the column name or the metadata column, and then define as confidential. And then if we cancel out of that, and then next, we can automatically run this in simulation mode just to ensure that it's working as part of our testing. And if we're happy with that and it is working, then we can automatically turn on that policy. So as and when that AI sensitivity column is updated, then we can automatically apply a sensitivity label and encryption and watermarking if you wanted to do that too. Another thing for the next video is I'm looking at different ways to call out to other AI models. Now we can use Microsoft's AI Foundry in order to create, fine-tune or custom models over there and then publish that back into Copilot Studio. Again, we need more content for other videos, right? But just to show you what I'm playing with at the moment is I've created this action. For the moment is a manual trigger, but this calls out to the new Mistral AI OCR. The reason for this, and not using things like AI Builder, is the OCR capabilities in Mistral are sublime. They're so good at looking at content, being able to look at images, being able to pull that metadata out of the image and have that as like raw JSON, that we can do a lot more with that capability of that model as well. So we're obviously passing that JSON down, and then what we can do is use AI Builder to summarize the body of that content, or even pull out some of the structure of that JSON and then use that as metadata into SharePoint again. And then we can also call our relevant agent from here as well. So again, just to wrap up, this is the flow of what I just shown you. I am creating some more detailed instructions on my GitHub. So if you look up, which is IT Specialist 111, I'm starting to build out some documentation in here as well. Bear with me while I do this. But what you will find in here at the moment is the high level instructions, not the detail, but it gives you the kind of premise of what you need to go away and do. And also the autonomous agents general instructions as well. So again, I posted this on LinkedIn. A lot of people said, can I have your general instructions? Yeah, of course you can. Go and have a play with those. And I've also put in the action instructions here as well. So you can see how I'm going away and actually calling the variables, and how the agent then is reformulating all of those actions into those variables that we need. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.